So we're going to go live and let's see what happens.
Hey, it says live.
Does it say live? Really?
Yes, it does. It
All
says
right.
live.
All right. So if people see us, I'm just waiting for my computer to fire up, but apparently we are live. This is the stuff that happens before we go live. But apparently it just says, "Hey, you're live now. We're streaming live."
Just
Hi
like that.
everyone. Just like that. Yeah. Hi. I'm Emil Guillermo, the museum director of the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. We're in Stockton, California, and so I'm not reading things. I take out my glasses, but we're here. See, there we are, the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. Once again, we're closed this weekend, but we're open virtually for you. We check in with you so you can check in with us at the Facebook page of at FANHS Museum. That's the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum page. We do this so that we can stay in touch and we can talk about Filipino American history. And joining me for this go round is Titania Buchholdt, who you recall she was one of our very first virtual pop up interviewees. We talked about her her mom being an important woman in Filipino American history, being the first state legislator who in Alaska was a member of the Alaskan state legislature, and she was. You talk about involvement, you talk about the election coming up, you talk about the need to see Filipino American women represented, Filipino American women voting. Well, Thelma Buchholdt, Ty's mom, she was an important woman in our history, and she is remembered in that interview, and you can see it on our Facebook Live page. But we've got Ty. Ty has other interests too. Her other interest is in Kulintang music and the Kulintang, all things Kulintang. So we're going to have Ty talk about that. Ty, thank you very much for being here.
Hello.
Yeah, and you've got your gongs there. I've got. If people didn't see the Fonz Museum background here, they'd know that I had some gongs. The other thing about Kulintang is that, well, it's a cultural thing. I'm wearing a tubao, a Maguindanao tubao, which you put on your head. It's a headdress, and you could do all sorts of things. And you were the one who showed me this. I think I bought this from you at one of the Fonz conferences. But you could do things like you can make it kind of popey if you
Yeah.
like the Catholic thing, or
It's not meant to be Catholic, no.
no, it's not Catholic. Or you can like do a kind of like a one flap down kind of thing, or
Right.
you can make it kind of individualistic. And one person said, "Oh, Emil, I saw you with your crown on, and it's not really. I guess it could be seen as a crown, but it's really a kind of a headdress, head wrap. It's called a tubao, and it's a Filipino indigenous thing, really. And so, and it's from being in that part of the world, that part of Asia. And so I wear it, even though if you saw the video I did from the I Hotel yesterday in San Francisco, I cut my hair, and this was a necessary thing. I needed to do it to get my to make sure that my hair stayed off my eyes, and and actually if you go back to the videos, I've been wearing this for about maybe 5, 6 weeks, a month or so or more, and I ended up liking it.
Yeah. You get
I ended
used
up
to it.
liking the tobao. You get used to it. And before I would wear a baseball cap, but
Yeah.
Filipinos don't wear. I mean, we play baseball, but a baseball cap is like, it's not like a tobao. A tobao was more versatile than a baseball cap, and so I've adopted the tobao thanks to you, Ty, from buying it at all those Fonz conferences. I ended up having like 3 or 4 of these, and it has made me more Filipino. I'm more Filipino because of the pandemic, and so that's why I'm wearing it. Now you're not wearing a tabao. That's not a tabao for women, is it?
No, no, you know what? Women don't wear tubao in Maguindanao culture or in the Philippines. Women don't wear tubao. They do wear a head covering, but it's it's not the same. It's not a scarf.
Yeah.
It's not a hand woven. It's usually something that is made out of cloth that is imported, because it doesn't matter where you are in the Philippines, the north, south, or the middle. You like imported things, right?
Yeah,
That's very
of
Filipino.
course, of course. Yeah, it's got to come from somewhere else. Well, wait a minute though. Wait a minute though. Now, a lot of people say you're the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum, which indicates that all right, Filipino American. This is Philippines. This is not, and yet a lot of this, the cultural, you know, what do you these things the tabao,
The
Kulintang music,
accessories.
right? They have come to America.
Yes, they have.
And so by coming to America, just like Filipino Americans, they become part of Filipino American culture. Really,
Yes,
right?
it's true.
I mean, and so one of the things, and I talked to you yesterday because I was just, all agog about coming to San Francisco and getting my hair cut, and okay, that's good. But I'm still wearing the tabao. But you said that a very important Filipino American is
Mm.
celebrating a memorial. Danny Calanduyan he is really considered the Filipino American Kulintang master. Uh,
Yes.
and by virtue of being the first, he didn't bring Kulintang music from the Philippines to the U.S., did he?
And well, he did, but he was not the first to do that. And I could go into the history because it's very interesting.
Mhm.
The first person who really brought Kulintang music to America was Jose Maceda, who was the very first Filipino ethnomusicologist. Jose Maceda was a musician. He was a pianist. He was a world traveler, and he ended up studying in Europe and studying in San Francisco. He ended up also deciding to study at UCLA. And this was in the 50s, the early 50s. And while he was studying at UCLA, he decided he would get his PhD in ethnomusicology, the first Filipino to do that. And he wanted to do his field research in Mindanao.
Right.
And so he decided he would study a particular culture. And so he went to Mindanao. I spoke to him about this a long time ago. I think it was 2001 when he was still alive. He's passed away. But he told me that he never intended to study Kulintang music. He had already set up his studies budget wise, time wise, with another culture and with another master musician. But when he arrived, people who he respected said, "You really ought to see this Kulintang player. I mean, you have to. It's gonna be amazing. You've got to see it." And Professor Maceda said, well, at the time he was a grad student, he said, okay, fine, but maybe after I get done with my field research, I'll go up there. But I'm busy right now. But people kept coming to him over and over and said, like, you really need to go. Well, he was in Mindanao, and finally he said, you know what? I'm going to keep hearing this. People are going to keep telling me that I need to go see this Kulintang player. So I guess I'll just go. So a couple of weeks into his field research with another culture in Mindanao, with another musician, he went up to Datupiang, which is in the heart of Maguindanao, the Maguindanao culture. And there he saw a teenager playing kulintang, and in a way that was, I think, somewhat supernatural because he was an incredible, incredible kulintang player. And I asked Professor Maceda, well, what did you think? So did you decide that you were going to study, the Kulintang? And it was such an impressive performance that he saw that he immediately dropped his research. He dropped it, redid his budget, redid his timing, redid everything, and started studying the work of Amal Lemuntod. And Amal Lemuntod was Danny Calanduyan's uncle. So that was the first Kulintang master that was heard of in America, because Professor Maceda, as a grad student, wrote his dissertation based on this research of the work of Amal Lumontud and all of the music, the Kulintang music that was played in Datupian. So Amal became somewhat famous. Amal, who never spoke Tagalog or English or any other language but Maguindanao, ended up traveling all over the world and giving concerts in Germany and in Saudi Arabia and different places. So Danny
well, but just to talk about the music was all, it began because of the academic research here
the academic research, right?
But it was always seen as academic research in America of Philippine culture, but it spread. And now Amal's connection with Danny, who did come to America, because Amal never came to America, did he?
I don't believe Amal ever came to America, but Danny grew up in a family where everybody knew about the great success of Amal being discovered by this academic. And so that is what guided Danny Calandrian as a young man. He played as a musician in his uncle Amal's Kulintang group. And he made a name for himself as a Gandingan player. A Gandingan, of the many instruments in the Kulintang ensemble, the Gandingan is one where it requires special skills because you're able to actually, if you're a master Gandingan player, you can communicate to other people in Maguindanao language, which is a very musical language. So you could play and people know exactly what you're saying. So Danny had mastered that, but because of the success of his uncle Amal, he decided that he would go far away for college. And so he ended up at Mindanao State University in Marawi City, which is in Lanao del Norte. And because of that, Danny was exposed to a lot of people he would not normally have ever met. And he was a farm boy, and he was pretty much kind of raised on the farm. And he would have never met people from other cultures. Because the Marawi City is in the heart of the Maranao culture, Danny learned Maranao Kulintang music, and he made some connections, and that's what brought him to America. The first person was Professor Jose Maceda. When Jose Maceda was doing his fieldwork, he did a lot of recordings. Those recordings were picked up by the Smithsonian and released in an album so that everybody in the world, if they took a look at the Smithsonian Folkways record collection, they would see that there's a Kulintang record from the 50s. And it was Professor Maceda's field recordings.
So before you go on to that, let's describe, because we're not going to play the music now, but we will put on links underneath this recording so people can hear what the Smithsonian has on record as Kulintang music, and how they recognize Danny, and why Danny is a significant Kulintang player here in the United States.
Yes.
But describe the music, because a lot of people they'll see the gongs in the back. They might have seen my show where I banged a few gongs inexpertly. But what is Kulintang music? Is it it's the gongs, the deep gongs, the little bells? What?
The Kulintang music of the Philippines is not just one kind of music. It is a music that depends on what was the existing music in a particular culture when the metal instruments came to the islands. So a lot of people will look at it and they'll say, oh, it looks like gamelan. And the reason why many Americans may know of gamelan music is that in Indonesia, gamelan music is played. It's not all the same. There's Sundanese gamelan, which is very different from Balinese, which is very different from Javanese. It's based on regions, but the instruments, they look the same in that they are metal instruments. They're gongs. Some of them are set in order horizontally on a rack, with the lowest note on the left and the higher note on the right. Some of the gongs are hanging gongs. Some of them are large singular gongs. Sometimes they're played in pairs. Gamelan music became very, very popular worldwide because one of the differences between gamelan music and Kulintang music is that gamelan music was adopted by the sultanates in the courts of the sultan in Indonesia long ago, and it was reduced into writing. That is to say, the sultan would hire a composer, an excellent composer, who would write down the music in what Western people could follow. And so, because this music is very ancient and it can be dated exactly because it was written for a monarch of sorts, on a piece of paper, it can be taught very easily in colleges. Kulintang music is not that way. Kulintang music was never played for a monarch necessarily. It was played by the people for themselves. It was a way that people entertain themselves, or they would use the music to pass time, to scare away birds during the harvest. So it was really more of a folk music. So Kulintang music of the Philippines is a folk music. It's not an orchestral music. It's not a court music, as I believe gamelan is.
But when people hear gonging, when people hear, it's usually it's like a percussive kind of. It's the bells are, or the gongs, the small gongs are arranged before the player, sort of like a xylophone and
Mhm.
or vibraphone,
Mhm.
and it's percussive, and it's the notes the bells are usually struck with a mallet. So when people hear it, it's a percussive kind of, it's rhythmic. Is
It's
it?
rhythmic and melodic both, and that's the really cool thing about it. One of the things, when people see a Kulintang ensemble, and it's not orchestral. It's not like the gamelan where you could see 70 different players. With Kulintang music, you usually just need 4 or 5 players. That's all. There is the main melody instrument, which is called the kulintang. It's interesting that the music in general is called kulintang. The main melody instrument is called kulintang. The entire ensemble is called kulintang. So you have to, as with much of Philippine language, you have to understand what it is by listening to the context. So there's that main melody instrument. Then there is the drum, which is a little bit of a timekeeper, except there really is a timekeeper. There it is, the timekeeper gong
It's like
that
a
you,
gong.
yes, yeah, so the timekeeper
Yep.
gong, you play on the side, you don't play it on the knob. There's
Right.
also a major difference between Kulintang music, gong music of the southern Philippines, and the gong music of the northern Philippines. So in the Luzon Cordillera, the gongs are all flat. They
Right.
don't have a knob. And in the South, the gongs all have a knob. And usually you play on the knob.
Okay, now when you say knob, now I know I
In
wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to get rid of my virtual background here because I
okay.
want people to see what you mean when you say uh, there's a knob on it.
uh-huh.
But all right, so I have this. Here's a gong, and so you play it on the side, or actually like more like
You can play it on the side if it's a timekeeper
right,
gong, but otherwise you do play it on the knob. So that protrusion, the circle there that kind of sticks out there, it is also called a boss, BOSS in Western music. It's called a boss.
boss. I'm
So
hitting the
as
boss.
if you have
Ah,
to think of it as if it's embossed. Well, it's not embossed. It's,
I see.
but they call it a boss or they call it a knob. The technical term is boss. And so you would be striking it lightly right in the center. Yeah. I can't actually hear
You
that.
can't hear that. You can't hear that like that. Can you hear that?
No, not really.
Okay.
So one of the things that people don't really think about with gongs is, where is that sound coming from? When you strike it on the top, the
Yeah.
sound waves are coming out on the other side from the back. So the back of the gong is open, and that's where the sound waves come out.
All right.
So
So I took us down this little distraction. I want because I wanted to show the knob and I wanted to show a gong, but now that's so I have a this is a gong a tambor, which is more like a timekeeper gong, but then there are the other melodic kulintang, which are the smaller gongs that you
mhm.
see someone like the
Oh,
master.
I have one. I have one here.
Oh,
Hey, You're going to do show and tell? Hey, why not? So,
Yeah.
so
Oh, the
here.
small gong.
So this is a small Kulintang. This is an antique. And yes, this would be the knob,
Right.
right? And so this one would be, because it's a high pitch, will be to my far right on the rack. The rack is called an antangen. It's not just a rack, it's also a resonator. So it amplifies the sounds of the gong, because this is outdoor music. This is not music to be played indoors. It's meant to be played outdoors.
But
And
also the gongs are laid out flat, right?
for
Generally?
the Kulintang, yes.
Yeah, for the cool.
Otherwise, they are hanging. And so when they're hanging, they hang in pairs. If they're the large kettle gongs called agong, they hang in two pairs. If they're the set of four, which is called the gandingan. And then there is the babandil, which you would just hold in your hand and play it on the rim. And what you have is an agong tambor, and that's actually for processions. It's a processional gong. So you sling it over your shoulder, and then you can walk along in a procession announcing that someone important is right behind you.
Or a wedding or something like that.
Yes, that's right. Someone
And
important.
and you bang the gong. Now, here's
Well,
the thing, like
you
a lot
play it. Try
you
not
play
to
it.
bang it too much.
But the idea is that most people, when they hear it, they might say, "Oh, it sounds like pots and pans. Oh, it sounds like they
Well,
might."
if it's a bad instrument, sure. I mean, a bad instrument will sound bad, but a good
Well,
instrument will sound great.
I'm saying to the untrained ear, to the person who says, "Oh, hurts my ear." They may not appreciate it, but this is a way that people communicate. Like you said, it's a folk music. It's a way that people pass the time, communicated with themselves. And what made Danny special when he took the music? Was it his rhythm? Was it what made his style of play special, that he adopted it, or it was passed on by his uncle to him, and then he came to America and became really the premier, or one of the first teachers of Kulintang music here, after Maseda made it
So,
academically,
right.
sound, or academically respectable in the world music scene, in the ethno music scene. Danny comes in and becomes the proponent. He becomes the Frank
Right.
Sinatra of the Kulintang, really, really.
That's true. So after Maseda, there was another ethnomusicologist, Robert Garfias, who had been hired at the University of Washington in Seattle and asked to put together an ethnomusicology program that would be like the best in the world. Because of Maceda's work, Garfias became familiar with that as he was looking at all the different types of music that hadn't really been explored much, and probably would be a great draw for ethnomusicology students. And so Garfias went to Mindanao, and he had some videos, well, I guess they weren't videos back then. They were films. They were very short films done of Kulintang music among the Maranao, different places. And he made some contacts at Mindanao State University. He found a person who played Kulintang. It was in his family, and his name was Usupai Kadar. And Usupai was a very good writer. The idea was that University of Washington didn't just want to bring people to teach, they wanted to actually have graduates. So they were looking for people who could come in, teach, and also be students at the same time. So
Right.
Usupai came. He was a very good writer. And at one point he said, "I'm not going to teach anymore. I'm going to work on my dissertation. You need to go find somebody else." And so Danny was at that time at Mindanao State University. He had already been discovered there and had been participating as a member of the Durangan Cultural Troupe, which toured throughout the Philippines and also internationally. And Danny, after he graduated with his degree in community development, he attained a position where he was basically the campus musician, working in the office of the dean of the university. And so, being the campus musician, he had good status is like, this guy has proven that he has what it takes to teach Kulintang. Well, I don't know about teaching. He knew how to play it. What Danny learned when he did get invited to University of Washington is he learned how to teach Americans Kulintang music. And that is very, very special. This is not something that people would know if they're raised in the culture, because in Danny's culture, which is the Maguindanao culture, you start hearing this music as soon as your ears start hearing, and you're still inside your mother. You haven't been born yet. You hear this music every day. When you're born, you already have been hearing this music for a while. And so people learn this music just from hearing it. Nobody sits you down at a certain time and says, we're going to have a lesson. You watch what's going on and you pick it up. So Danny learned his style of music really not so much from his uncle Amal, but from his mother. And the Kulintang is an instrument where there are today both male and female players of the Kulintang, which is the 8-gong instrument. It can vary from 6 to 9 gongs, but now it's been standardized to 8. There used to be a time when it was an instrument primarily for women. This was a women's instrument. And the other genders, men and women, they could play all the other instruments, but the Kulintang was really more of a women's instrument. Danny's mother and her sisters were descended from a great Kulintang player, and they all had their own style. So in this music, what's really important is your style. And this is a music that's not played from paper or sheets of paper. It's all memory. And it's very
So
non-Western.
is it all improvised? Is it improvised like a jazz drummer would improvise, or is it?
It is in a way improvised. The fact is that there is an accepted beginning or series of beginnings. You can choose the beginning you like. If you're playing with a number of other musicians, you have the entire ensemble. Everybody has to take the cue from your first notes. Okay, that's the song that the Kulintang player is going to play. And then the Kulintang player is free to play a piece that has certain phrases. They can go ahead and mix and match. They can put in phrases that they've made up themselves. They have their own version. And then there are a series of accepted endings. And so the other musicians will hear the ending coming, and then they'll know it's the end, and they'll all end at the same time.
So if it's not written down, that means recordings are really the best way to understand how this music evolves, and understanding the circumstances in which the music was played. You can hear maybe repetitious things like, oh, this is at a procession, or this is when someone's happy, or this is when someone's sad. But you can tell from the recordings that there's some emotion behind this music, that there's melody, and as well as the percussive aspects of it.
It's a very complex music. I'll just tell you that. I think a lot of people don't understand how complex it really is. When you say the way to learn is from watching recordings, well, of course, it wasn't played for over 1,000 years in the Philippines from people watching recordings. Also, it wasn't played for 1,000 years from people playing the metal gongs. What happened was people, can you imagine Filipinos not playing music ever? I mean, Filipinos have always played music. They have always sung. They have always made instruments out of bamboo and done something that was rhythmic to accompany their singing. So when the gongs, the metal gongs, came to the Philippines through traders, there used to be a major international port in Mindanao along the Pulangi River, long before the Spanish ever came. And this international port is acknowledged by some academics as being the birthplace of Kulintang music in the Philippines. And it was called Dulawan, which is now called Datupiang. So Dulawan was a major international port because it was protected. There was a fort at the mouth of the river, and the fort was made of stone. It was called Kutawato, which means stone fort. And so if a ship started coming up river, the fort could then see that there was someone coming that could determine whether they were friend or foe, or they're traitors. And so it was, the port was protected that way. So that is where Kulintang gongs are thought to have first emerged out of a ship. They weren't called Kulintang gongs, they were just metal gongs. However, once those gongs were there, they sure do last a whole lot longer than bamboo gongs, or bamboo anything for that matter. So they were immediately adopted as soon as they arrived. And the music that was already existing, which was either the chanted music, the songs, or the music that was played on the kuchapi. Kuchapi is a Maguindanaon 2-string lute, huge, it's like 6 feet long, but very rhythmic music. So between the very melodic music of the singing and the chanting and the very rhythmic music of the kuchapi, those types of music were then played on the gongs. So Kulintang music is music that is very ancient and existed long before the metal gongs came.
So how long would you say? I mean, so this is an ancient music, ancient form with these original instruments, but they get passed on through generations from by people playing to other people and by their memory. I mean, of course,
Yes.
there's no recording back then, but what I meant by the recordings now is that when Danny comes over to America to play for Americans, it's the recordings that people listen to, and they hear these polyrhythms, they hear this complex music, and yet is this, would you call this indigenous music? Is it is that
Yeah,
the proper term for it?
I would call it that, because even though, so you were asking this question about, is this Filipino American music? You'd asked me that before. I said, this is Filipino American music because this is a very dynamic music. I think because of the fact that it's not written down and people are absolutely discouraged to copy each other. It's considered insulting to play a Kulintang song exactly the way someone else has done it. It shows your lack of ability. Very, very non-Western concept there. So because the music is always changing, most of the Kulintang music that is played in America by Filipino Americans is a snapshot in time of what Danny Kalanduyan learned as a young man from his mother. So there are so many kinds of Kulintang music in the Philippines, depending on the culture. There's Maranao and Maguindanao. There's the Tausug, Samal. There's a type of music that is called Kulintang. They use different kinds of instruments. The Blan, the Manobo, the Tiboli have Kulintang also. So there are many cultures, not just the Moro cultures, but also the cultures that are called Lumad, which is truly indigenous. They all play this music.
But it's not religious. It's not like, oh, that's
No,
what
not at all.
Muslims play. That's what the,
No.
I mean, it's not, it's, people shouldn't confuse it for being some kind of religious, you
Has
know.
nothing to do with any kind of religion at all. This is a folk music that people started playing on bamboo, and then bamboo and stone. And then when the metal instruments came to the southern Philippines through trade, the music that people were already playing on wood logs or in bamboo was transferred over to the metal instruments. And this happened all throughout the southern Philippines. And I believe it also happened throughout all of the Philippines, except the Spanish did manage to get rid of as much indigenous music as they could. So we don't really know how far it went
So
to the north.
how should we look upon Danny bringing Kulintang to the United States? He's like the Johnny Kulintang seed. He plants it here in the U.S., goes to Seattle, comes to the Bay Area in San Francisco, starts playing and showing people. Before his death, he was in Stockton and he was playing with
Yeah.
youth groups there. This music starts to spread and gains popularity over the last, say, 40 years here in America. How,
Because of Danny's work, yes.
and
Yeah.
how does it, and so this is how it becomes, how Kulintang music becomes a Filipino American music. How
Mhm.
is it, how should we see it as anything but, is it a copy of what Filipino Americans see, what it must be like to be Filipino, or is it truly Filipino American? American because oh, this is a riff I heard on a Jay-Z record, or this is what I heard on a sample from some kind of rap, and I'm going to use this rhythm here in Kulintang. Do we see that kind of collaboration or that kind of mishmash of things happening in American Kulintang music?
Well, in American Kulintang music, there are, of course, the huge influences of Danny Kalandian, who, if not for his work, there would not be as many Kulintang players as there are. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, what are you talking about, Kulintang players? You just wait. There's going to be an explosion of Kulintang in the next year. It's going to be everywhere. And it's finally, I think, going to have a chance to be something that people will hear Kulintang, they say, hey, that's Filipino, isn't it? But also they're going to say that's Filipino American. And
Because it's
there are,
different. It's got to be different from the way they played in the Philippines, and
yes, it
considering
is.
the circumstances and the environment. So Filipino Americans get their stamp. And what
Yes.
is that stamp? Is it people yearning to find out what their Filipino roots are? Is it people saying, I'm hearing stuff here in America, I'm going to combine it with a Kulintang polyrhythm to create something unique that is definitely Filipino American?
So there's definitely fusion. That is a fact. So there's really three types of Kulintang music in America, in North America, for that matter. And one of them is the type of music that people learn from Danny, which is very traditional, the way he learned it from his mother, the way she learned it from her mother, the way it just goes back in time. So that's very, very traditional Filipino, and actually something that's rare in the Philippines, because as I said before, it's a very dynamic music. And if you went back to the Philippines and you wanted to hear music played exactly the way Danny played it, it you'd only hear it in Danny's like brothers and sisters. They're the only people who play that, and then their descendants play it. So it's a very small group of people who play it exactly that way. The other way is fusion. People like to play kulintang. They'll have an instrument, usually an agong, which is the large kettle gongs, or they'll have the kulintang, and they'll play with other musicians. So other musicians will be playing something with maybe the same tempo, same time signature, and then they will have the kulintang play something traditional, and then they'll riff off of it, the other instruments. So one of the great examples is Professor Hafez Modirsadeh from San Francisco State University, who actually took his saxophone and tuned it to the same tuning as Danny Kalanduyan's Kulintang set, so they could play together. It was very amazing. So that was an awesome collaboration. So that's fusion, where you take a little bit of the Kulintang music and then you build around it. Then there's the third kind, where you don't really have any relationship. Your music doesn't have any relationship to traditional, but geez, Kulintang music looks fantastic when you play it and you're able to make it sound good. So there are musicians who do that, who just have it, and it's more than just a prop. They're able to get nice sounds out of it. I had a musician ask me, I don't know, more than 10 years ago, what to do when she wanted to play Kulintang, and yet there was no Kulintang master. Danny was in Northern California, she was in Southern California. I said, do what you can, but please just don't go banging on the gong. Don't be going whack, 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 whack. Please honor your ancestors, honor your culture, and make it sound good. Just make it sound good. Make it sound like music and not like noise. And I think she does a good job. She gets up on the stage and she has the kulintang and a lot of other musical instruments, a lot of percussion. She's a good percussionist. She's able to make it sound good. Doesn't have anything to do with the music that is traditional among the Maguindanao or any of the traditional cultures, kulintang playing cultures of Mindanao. That truly is Filipino American Kulintang music.
Right. So when you get this happening and you say we're going to see this explosion because young people are discovering Kulintang. Now, I imagine there must be some people who say everything that's Filipino has to be Spanish or colonial, or it's the mandolin type of
The Banduria.
yeah, the bayanihan strings, right? But that's not.
This is pre-colonial. This is the oldest of the music of the indigenous cultures of the Philippines. I can't say I can't really say is the oldest because, I'm not only just interested in the music of the Southern Philippines, but I also know the indigenous music of the Northern Philippines because I was very lucky that my mother found out in the year 2000 that her roots were Ibanag out of the northernmost portions of Luzon Island in the Philippines. And so she tried very hard to reconnect with the Ibanag culture, but it's very isolated and there were no roads. And the few roads there were kept being washed out, even when she'd go not in the rainy season. So she was a sort of adopted by a Kalinga village. And she brought everybody in the family to this Kalinga village over a series of trips, series of visits. And there's one village adopted my mother and she adopted them back. And we all were given access to the music, to the dance, to the culture. And so in that part of the Philippines, they do play the flat gongs. And I've learned how to play the flat gongs. I play it for friends who are born and raised and know how to do the dances of the Northern Philippines. But so I think that the indigenous music of the Philippines that still exists today is in those areas that the Spanish were not successful in destroying the indigenous culture.
And the thing is, you talk about Kalinga to the north, it's still, even though it's a flat gong, it's still Kulintang, just like the people in
Well,
Maguindanao.
I don't know
Right?
about still Kulintang. It's very different because they don't have the gongs on a rack. And that's the big difference. Their gongs are handheld, one per person. So you hold it in your hand or you put it down on your lap. You play a topaya, which is flat hands on your lap, or else you can hold it in your hand and dance. The musicians actually dance. And yes, there can be a lot of different notes. And if you're really good at it, it's a team sort of ensemble, definitely a team, because you have to have everybody playing at just the right moment in order to make it a fast music.
All right, we're going to try to have some examples in the chat box that we'll add after this interview. But we got into this because we were going to celebrate Danny as one of the originators, the first person to teach here, even though it had to be recognized by Maceda and the guy up
well, there were a number of people. Yeah. So it was Maceda, Garfias, Kadar, and then Danny. But Danny really taught more people. He was not the academic. He got his master's degree in ethnomusicology at the University of Washington. But he really wasn't an academic in any way. He really was a practitioner. And he was a very good teacher.
And so what the breakthrough for Danny is that he was recognized by the National Endowment for the Arts,
yes,
and also by the Smithsonian.
Yes.
How significant is that in terms of establishing Kulintang as a Filipino American thing, part of our Filipino American culture?
It's huge because Danny Calandian is the only person who has ever been recognized as basically a national treasure for his work in traditional arts, traditional Philippine arts. He's the only Filipino American, he's the only person of Philippine heritage who has been practicing Filipino traditional arts in this country, in the US, and been rewarded for that. National recognition for a traditional art is very rare. It's given to a number of people every year. And Danny's the only Filipino American who has ever been recognized for traditionally Filipino arts. The other thing too about the Smithsonian, Danny passed away on September 28th. Is that what month is this? So September, right?
September, right?
Today's September. so
Pandemic blues. I know. Yeah.
Tomorrow's his 4-year death anniversary, which is why I think you decided to say, hey, let's talk about that. Let's talk about Danny's contribution to Filipino American history. I mean, he was really the person who drove the existence of Kulintang music in America. And the Smithsonian recognized him. They had been planning to bring him to Washington, D.C. in 2017. He passed away in 2016. So I went in 2017 along with a lot of Danny's students, and we were representing Danny at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival in 2017. There were a lot of awards given to Danny. And you said something earlier that's really stuck in my mind about people hear this music and they're like, oh, it's
All
no
right, all right, all right.
Yeah, but Danny played music where you went, wow, what is that? I mean, that's the difference between a really masterful musician and someone who doesn't know what they're doing. So yes, Filipinos love to mimic. They love to pretend. They like to improvise. Some of the worst music, so-called music I've ever heard in my life, are on CDs that are available where they say there's Kulintang music on there, and there's not. Someone just taking a hammer going whack, whack, whack. It sounds horrible. I think that does such a disservice to the culture. I mean, that you're pretending that you know what you're doing. Please make it beautiful, because Kulintang music is beautiful. It's really beautiful music. And when Danny would play, didn't matter whether you had an opinion about the music or not, or if you'd ever knew that there is music like that in the Philippines, you would just go, because it was a joy, such a joy to listen to.
Yeah.
And that was his mastery, and which he learned from his mother, who learned from her ancestors, the total mastery of beautiful music.
And that's a key point. We're going to show examples on the chat box. This recording, we're live now, but when the recording is put up, we'll put links to some examples of Danny's work and why it's important to at least remember him as we approach the 4th year of his death day, and also just understand that when we see people get excited about Kulintang music, they're getting excited about something that is based or its roots are Filipino, but it's being the artistic act is committed here in America by American Filipinos, and it is a part of our Filipino-American culture and our Filipino-American history, brought over by the premier teacher, Danny Calanduyan. So, Ty, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this music, to get into the history, and to get into why it's important to discuss this. Now, I understand that you're doing, right, do you still have your nonprofit that teaches young people Kulintang music, or any
So our group has been around since 2001, and the nonprofit has changed a lot, and it has changed a lot since Danny passed away. It's not that we've been scattered to the winds, but people are getting older and moving on. Some people are moving on, but the amazing thing is that younger people are coming in, and they are developing communities around them. One of the great things about Kulintang music is that you really can't play it by yourself. It is really a community music. You really have to have it, play it around other people. And if you don't, you can keep playing your instrument by yourself, but something happens. It's a sort of a phenomenon that I call drift, where you sort of drift away from what you need to know in order to play with other people. So it is a polyrhythmic music, especially Maguindanao music is extremely complex. It's very, very complex. And if you're not playing regularly with people, you get horribly rusty. To some degree, it's like being on a bicycle that you don't forget, but there's really good bicycle players, and there's like people who can, not fall off. so if you continue playing with other Kulintang players, you will get so tight, and the music is so amazing. One of I think the core groups of supporters that Danny Calanduyan had were other professional musicians. They would hear him play, and it would just blow them away. And I think that because it is so complex, you may have to be a professional musician in order to see it, in order to appreciate it, and in order to just be enthralled by the whole thing, which is not to say that people off the street wouldn't be enthralled. I mean, everyone who saw it would go like, that's amazing.
But the thing you said earlier too is that this is a folk music. It's a people's
Yes,
music. It's based on the circumstances under which the musicians find themselves. So,
right.
well, how can the layperson, the average Filipino American who's like new to this, I'm sure some people have heard or been introduced to Kulintang music in the past, but maybe they've, they haven't been as open. I don't know, but we now see more people. There was a thing in Stockton a
Yeah.
couple of years ago before Danny died. I guess it's been a while. If it's been 4 years, they did a big celebration of Danny's young students here in Stockton,
Yes.
who are now
Yes.
4 years older. And so the question now is, how can people who are new to this just embrace it, and how should they approach it? When we put the links on the chat box once this recording is done.
Well, right now, there really are very few Kulintang recordings available, but that's going to change very shortly in the next year.
Really,
And
recordings are coming out. People are coming out with CDs and
yes,
performing, maybe not just Danny's, but new artists will be emerging.
yes. And so Danny was able to inspire a lot of different Filipino American and even Filipino Canadian musicians. And I think just before Danny passed away, I think just about everybody had a CD that they had put together, and limited editions and things like that. But I think that there's going to be more of those available in the coming year. One of the other things that I encourage people to do while they're waiting for those recordings to come out and be commercially available is take a look at YouTube. There's a lot of Kulintang on YouTube. Some of it is, as I said earlier, not by experts, and so you have to sort of look around and find something that sounds incredible, that sounds beautiful, that is amazing. And then, if you see something and you go like, geez, that's not so good, we have to understand that there's a lot of people who love the prop of the Kulintang and they
Like
just bang
me.
on it.
But
Yeah,
I
that's
don't just
right.
bang on it. I'm respectful, but I'm not. I played the clarinet. I can't. That's why my touch on the gong is not as good. I want to finger it, and not
Yeah.
gracefully. Anyway, but and I was not a
So
bad clarinet player either. But you're
but
right.
let me just finish this up. There are people who do teach Kulintang lessons online through Zoom lessons, and
Oh,
I have some friends down in Los Angeles. I think Malaya Arts. They're based in Los Angeles. I saw that they had a couple of programs on Facebook Live these past couple of Fridays, and they advertised that they also have been teaching Kulintang, which they have. They've been teaching children Kulintang before the pandemic, in person, but they are also willing to teach online. So shout out to Malaya.
yeah. I first met you. Well, I mean, before I met you, I noticed a number of Kulintang players. Actually, when Danny was first, you know,
In San Francisco.
yeah, in the '80s, and
Yes.
so I've known Danny for a long time and known about Kulintang music, and people come and they go, and then when I met you and your mom at FANHS, that was real special because I know that the music and the accoutrements of Filipino culture, came through. But now we're going into this new generation, right?
Yes.
This new phase where Kulintang is Filipino American, and
Yeah.
I really just wanted to mark that, and we can mark it with the death anniversary of Danny to say, boy, this is what he's done. He
Yes.
began this, and now we're going to see how it's going to, as you put it, explode. And so
Yeah.
we're going to put stuff. I mean, recognized by the National Endowment for the Arts. That's no small feat. Recognized by the Smithsonian, and we're gonna put some links on the chat box, and people can listen to the music because as you say, as you talk about it and how beautiful it can be, I can hear how it's kind of like it gets you in a kind of trance in a way. It's kind of a trance music.
Yes, it is. It is indeed. And in fact, that was one of the traditional uses of the music in the Philippines for centuries and centuries is before Western culture, before there were mm, European cultures had come to the Philippine Islands, people would seek a healer. It's very common. Most people who were raised in Philippine culture or even Philippine American culture know that there's going to be a healer in the village, somebody that you go to that, you know, when something's wrong, you see what they can do. And sometimes the healer needs to go into a trance in order to be possessed by a healing spirit. And this doesn't happen in every culture in the Philippines. And there's so many cultures in the Philippines, but it was a predominant part of my childhood. I was healed by a healer when I was 10 years old in my mother's village. So I take it very seriously. And I feel like most people understand the idea that the healer is the person who sort of channels that healing energy from the universe to the sick person. In Maguindanao culture, the healer needed to be put into a trance, and that was through Kulintang music. Actually, that's how Danny became well known when he was a teenager. He was known as an expert gandingan player, which is the set of four gongs, which is actually two pairs of gongs. He was just known as a very good gandingan player. And then one day or evening, he was at home eating his dinner, and somebody was running around trying to find a Kulintang player because there was a healing ceremony happening nearby. And the first Kulintang player who had been hired to play the music in order for the healer to go into the trance had failed. Then they had found a second Kulintang player who also failed to get the healer to go into a trance. And so they're like trying to find somebody because the healing ceremonies are very large. They're very intricate. It costs a lot of money. They have certain requirements of food and the presentation and who does what. And so they're looking for a Kulintang player, and Danny was not known as a Kulintang player, but this is the fantastic thing about Kulintang music. If you play the music, you don't just play one instrument. No, 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 no. That's a Western culture thing. You play all of them. You know how to play them all, because if you don't know how to play them all, then how do you know, especially in a polyrhythmic music, where your place is? So Danny said, okay, well, I'll do it. And so he went, mostly because it was a paying gig, right? So he went in the middle of eating and says, okay, I'll go. So he goes over and he plays, and he's able to get the healer into a trance. And for a young man, he came back and he had a lot of glory. He's like the football star who did the touchdown, right?
It was like the AAA for healers. He called tall AAA. They jumpstart the healer, they puts him in the trance. Let's go. I'm
right.
ready. Helotville. Right? The helots.
Yes. So well, it's a little bit more complicated than a helot. It really is, because helots are they're a little bit different. So yeah.
I saw one of those. But the healer, all right, healer is like energy.
Yeah, but sort of you are possessed by a healing spirit. And so and there's different kinds of them. I had interviewed Danny one time, and he sat down and he let me take a bunch of notes, and I put them up on Facebook, and people are like, "Whoa, we had no idea. Thank you," because he identified the different kinds of spirits. There's the one who can heal the person right in front of them. There's the one who can actually predict what a person's future health issues will be. When that particular kind of spirit takes over and possesses a healer, people go all over the neighborhood and say, hey, the special kind of spirit is there. Come on, you need to go find out what you need to take care of now. So it's considered kind of a preventive medicine, right? You got to go find out what your problem will be someday.
but Danny was only able to get the healer into the trance. He wasn't the healer himself.
Correct. He was never the healer himself. The person who is playing the Kulintang has to play in a very relaxed, soothing, and even manner. It takes a lot of skill, because yes, you are getting the healer into the trance, and so that they open up so they can be possessed by the healing spirit. Anyway, I lost track of that sentence.
No, but that's something. It is a music that has a function
Yes,
It's not just for entertainment. It's not just, it can be, but
it can
it's
be.
part of the um, functional aspect of Kulintang music, the
The
healing
other
aspect.
the other thing too that is very non-Western about Kulintang music, that's very Filipino, is that especially among the Maguindanao, they have music contests almost every night. So when people play, they're not just playing to entertain each other; they're playing to outdo each other. They're playing to challenge each other and to challenge themselves. Their musicianship is improved with every single night that they play with their family, friends, and relatives. And the other thing, too, is because this is an outdoor music, especially in a pre colonial time in the Philippines, when people would travel from one area to another, if you heard Kulintang music being played and you knew how to play it, you could show up uninvited because that is the invitation. When you hear the music, you're invited. You just have to make yourself known, tell people that you knew how to play, and people say, yes, play something different that we haven't heard before. And
So
so
now,
it's community development that way.
so do you see that happening here in Filipino American communities when people come to a community the first, they want to know where the Filipinos are. They're not gonna like hear the sizzling sound of the fish frying or smell the garlic. They're gonna hear the Kulintang music. Is that what's gonna happen?
Oh my goodness. I don't think it's going to happen in this decade. That's for sure. There just aren't enough Kulintang players. But I'll tell you that all of the Kulintang players who learn from Danny or learn from Danny's students, we all know who each other are, or we all know who we can jam with if we must have a jam or if we have to get together. Um, in that way, if there is a Kulintang party or there's a party where Kulintang music is being played, you can just show up and say, "Hey, can I play?" And people are like, "Yes, let's hear what you know. Let's hear what you've got."
Yeah, I take my gong and I use it in my one man show, and I just gong it as a timekeeper. But when I met some other Kulintang players, oh my God, they wanted to jam with me, and I said, no, I'm not jammable. I'm not jam worthy. I can keep the time a little bit, but there are, they were real musicians, and
It's because they saw your gong and they said, "That's the real thing."
yeah, well,
It's
it
a,
was a night. Yeah, it was a yeah. My gong is a special gong. But look, I just want to prepare people for this onslaught of Kulintang that's about to happen in America because of Filipino Americans discovering it, and it's happening. And as I said, we're talking on the fourth anniversary of Danny Kalanduyan's death, and it's he left a legacy that endures, and
yes.
we're going to see it. And like I said, we're going to put examples of the music in the chat box. Ty is going to do that. We're going to put it in there. Uh, Titania Buchholdt, a Kulintang. You're a purveyor. You have your nonprofit, which are you still teaching yourself?
Yeah, I'm still teaching. Yeah.
And so a Kulintang teacher, a close associate of Danny Kalanduyan's, and he was a part of the nonprofit that you had together, right?
Well, Danny and I started it in 2001. We co-founded it, and the idea was that I don't know, he wanted to have more control over the types of the direction of his music. I feel like one of the best things was when we put together the nonprofit that we were able to do some recordings, to issue some recordings, which unfortunately um, are rare at this time. But as I said, there will be an explosion in the
Oh,
coming year,
I get
very
a
soon, actually.
I get a hint that we're going to hear some Danny Kalanduyan recordings soon. Is that?
Well, some other things too.
Well, that's
Yeah,
great. That's great.
yeah.
All right, Ty, thank you very much for being part of this virtual museum pop-up. We do this every Sunday, Saturday, and Sunday because the museum stays closed during COVID. But hopefully, we'll break out soon. Our fingers are crossed. But in the meantime, we also build this as a kind of a Sunday brunch. I didn't bring anything to brunch. I was more continental brunch, but I thought we'd brunch on information about Danny, information about Kulintang, and I think we've had we've had a good repast on Kulintang information and about what's about to happen. So,
Yeah.
Ty, thank you very much. You're going to put that music in the chat box too, right?
I'll do that for you. Sure. I'll do that.
Okay. All right. We're going to do it. Thank you very much again. And for you at wherever you are, at home, in your car, thank you for joining us on these another virtual FANHS Museum pop up. As I said, we do this because we believe that even though we're closed, you check in on us, we check in on you. The museum is where you are. Thank you for checking this out. The recording will be up momentarily, so if you missed any or part of whatever part you want to see again, check it out. There are other recordings that we've done. They're going to be on our Facebook page. That's at FANHS Museum, at FANHS Museum on Facebook, and check the link to our YouTube channel if you like to look at these things on YouTube. We're on our YouTube channel as well. I'm Emil Guillermo. I'm the museum director of the FANHS Museum, the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. Join us again next week. Next week, it's going to be big. We're starting off Filipino American National National History Month. And so this is a good sort of pre-kickoff. We talk about Kulintang music, and we'll have other things. I've got lots of good issues coming up in the coming weeks of October. Remember, we're not just, October is Filipino American National History Month, not just because my birthday is in there. It's also other things. Well, Larry Itliong's birthday is in October. And the real reason October is a month, we'll talk about that next month in October. So, Ty, thank you again for being with us. Thank you wherever you are on Facebook. This is the FANHS Virtual Museum Pop-Up. Thank you very much.
Bye.
And we will stop the live stream.